Hello, I'm Mark Hammett, minister of the Weber Road Church of Christ in Corpus Christi, Texas. And I'm glad that you're joining us for this devotional and daily Bible reading. And I hope that you'll turn your Bibles, if you'll get those out, to Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7. And we'll begin reading in just a moment from Matthew 7, starting in verse 15. I'll be reading from the English Standard Version, although any version you have will do. And again, I want to welcome you to this daily devotional and Bible reading. And one thing I wanted to point out is I really appreciate the encouragement from so many of you that listen to these devotionals. And I would ask that if you get something out of it, you're encouraged by it at all, that's the purpose of these devotionals and Bible readings, that you simply put a like on Facebook. You might even message me. I've heard from friends that are old and those that are new friends, those that I don't even know. I've received some messages from many by doing these devotionals, and it's always good to hear from those who might be encouraged. And one of the things that I thought I'd share with you today is something I read about Arabian horses. They go through rigorous training, especially in the deserts of the Middle East. Their trainers require absolute obedience from these horses. And the final test that they go through seems to be beyond the endurance of any living thing. For you see, the trainers force these horses to do without water for many days, and then they turn them loose. And as they run toward the water, just as they get to the edge, ready to plunge in and drink, the trainer blows his whistle. The horses that have been trained completely and have learned perfect obedience stop. They turn around and come back to the trainer. And then they're forced to stand there quivering, obviously wanting water, but they wait in perfect obedience. And when the trainer is sure that he has their obedience, he gives them the signal to go ahead and drink. Now that may seem severe to many of you, but a person that's in a trackless desert, for example in Arabia, you know, your life is entrusted to a horse that is perfectly trained and obedient in every way. You know, in many ways, we must also accept God's training and obey God. I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 7, starting in verse 15, and we'll read to the end of the chapter. And part of this passage has to do with obedience. Jesus says this is the end of what we know as the Sermon on the Mount. Beware false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You'll recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. He goes on to say, not everyone who says to me, Lord, 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 will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name? And then will I declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like the foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. And when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority, and not as their scribes. Notice in that passage when it talks about obedience to God and his will, that we are to do exactly what he says, what he commands, what he directs us to do in our lives. And I hope that is what you do in your life. And again, if we can help you here at Weber Road at the Church of Christ in any way, whether you live in our community or whether you live in another place in America or throughout the world, please contact us. We'll give you all the assistance we can. If you don't live in this community, we'll try to put you in touch with a good, faithful, and sound Church of Christ in your area. But remember, may the Lord bless you richly as you seek to do His will.